All right, as a super who's been through more than a few tough summers, I know exactly what the pressure feels like. Water's getting more expensive, these heat waves are becoming the new normal, and yet, the demand for perfect playing conditions never ever lets up. So we're all looking for an edge, right? Let's break down some new research that might just be the thing we're looking for. So let's start with the question that probably keeps a lot of us up at night. It's not about chasing dry spots with a hose after they appear. The real goal is to build a plant that's tough enough to handle the stress before it even shows up. So how do we do that? How do we build that resilience right from the soil up?
I mean, we all know this story, right? Water bills are climbing, restrictions are becoming way more common, and on top of all that, you've got that constant demand for tournament-level greens. It feels like every single season we're being asked to do more with less.
Look, we can't just keep throwing more water or more labor at the problem. That's the old way of doing things, and it's just not sustainable. The smarter play is to get our turf to work for us. We need to find tools that help that plant use every single drop of water as efficiently as it possibly can.
Okay, so let's get into the good stuff. We're going to dive into this independent trial that's looking at a couple of products designed to do exactly that. Think of this as a peek under the hood at how we can potentially build that toughness and that resilience we're all chasing.
So this research was done by the folks at J.J. Dempsey. They're a really well-respected independent firm. And what they did was they took creeping bent grass, the same stuff many of us are managing every single day, and they put it under the microscope in a controlled greenhouse environment to see how it would handle a manufactured drought. The goal here was really simple, and honestly super practical. Could these two products, Aquart 19 and Defend, actually help the soil hang on to moisture longer? And the big one, could they push back that dreaded wilting point? Can they make the grass tougher before the real heat even gets here?
So they set up a really straightforward trial. You've got 5 different groups. They tested Aquart 19 by itself, Defend by itself, then 2 different combination rates of both products. And of course, they had an untreated control group to measure everything against. It's just a really solid, clean setup.
And they were measuring the things that actually matter to us out on the course. First, volumetric water content, or VWC. That's just a fancy way of saying how much water is actually available in the root zone. Then, they looked at visual turf quality, overall plant health using an NDVI meter, and finally, the color, the greenness of the turf.
Okay, let's get to the results and see what they found. Now, you know how it is, science doesn't always go exactly the way you draw it up. In this trial, well, it hit an interesting little speed bump that, believe it or not, actually ended up revealing something really important.
And here's where it gets interesting. The researchers couldn't actually dry the turf out enough to hit their target. They were aiming for a 10% volumetric water content, which is kind of that danger zone where you really start to see some serious wilt, but for some reason they just couldn't stress the plant out as much as they wanted to.
And there were a couple of reasons for this. First, the weather was a little cooler, so that slowed down evaporation. But the bigger deal was the shallow 150mm trays they used, which you see on the left. They just held on to water a lot more than the deeper pots on the right, which would act more like a USGA spec root zone. They just didn't drain as fast.
But this is the amazing part about that unexpected result. Check this out. Even though they couldn't get it to full-blown wilt, the data showed this clear, consistent separation. The treated turf, every single one of the treatments, held on to way more water through the entire dry down compared to the untreated control at the bottom. The products were already working.
And all that extra moisture? It had a direct impact on plant health. The NDVI readings, which are a great way to measure plant vigor, were higher across the board for all 4 of the treatment groups. It's simple. More water in the tank meant a healthier, more active plant. And it wasn't just something the meters could pick up. The visual quality scores tell the exact same story. I mean, from a playability standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, the treated turf just looked better. It was healthier, and it was holding up better under that mild stress.
And finally, the color data backed it all up too. The dark green color index was better in the treated plots. It's just another clear sign that these plants were healthier and way more resilient, even in just the early stages of drying down.
So, okay, you see the charts, you see the data, but what does all this actually mean for us, the folks managing a golf course day in and day out? What's the practical takeaway here?
Here's the bottom line for me. These products started working long before the plant was anywhere near dying. They were building that resilience right from the get-go. Think of it like a savings account for water. You're making these small deposits early, so when that brutal summer heat wave finally hits, you've got reserves in the tank. This could be a total game changer for cutting down on all that hand watering and maintaining the consistent playability we're all trying to achieve. And hey, the research isn't over. They're going to run this whole thing again to really push that turf to the wilting point. They're either going to wait for hotter summer weather to guarantee the stress, or they'll just switch over to those deeper pots that are known to dry down a lot faster. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye out for those results.
So this whole trial really leaves us with a big, critical question to think about. Are we spending way too much of our time reacting with the hose and not nearly enough time preparing the plant? Because this data really suggests that a proactive approach, building a healthier, more water-efficient root zone before the stress arrives, might just be the smartest way for us to manage our courses going forward.